I didn't think the day I was supposed to become a bride would turn into a stage, built like a trap by the very relatives who swore they were trying to heal the family. But that's exactly what it was. 2 weeks before my wedding, a recording landed in my inbox at 11:02 p.m. My cousin Donna's whispery voice came first, nervous and rushed, like she was afraid the walls might hear her. Then my aunt's voice, clear as crystal. "He needs to apologize in front of everyone," she said, casual, like she was planning a seating chart. "Once the guests see how humble he is, she won't dare reject him. No one wants to look cruel at their own wedding." My stomach went cold, the way it does right before you're about to be hit by something you can't unknow. Because that he wasn't my groom. It was my sister, Stephanie. The same sister who ruined my first wedding 5 years ago by sleeping with my fiancé, Lauren. Yes, my Lauren, the man I was about to marry. Then marrying him 6 months later, like the rest of the family was supposed to clap. And now my aunt and uncle, Stephanie's parents, were paying nearly $40,000 for this wedding, smiling at me over spreadsheets and vendor quotes, pretending it was an apology. It wasn't. It was a setup. They'd hired a videographer. They'd drafted talking points. They'd planned for Stephanie, Lauren, and their 2 kids to arrive right before the ceremony so my aunt could force a public reconciliation, right there in front of everyone. So I'd have no choice but to accept. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed with the audio playing again, my hands shaking around my phone, and my fiancé now, Julian, watching me like he was trying to decide whether to be angry or to protect me. He didn't yell. He just said very quietly, "So they're using your wedding to make their moment." And in that silence, I realized something that made my throat tighten. They didn't want my happiness. They wanted my compliance. So we made a plan of our own. And on Saturday, we let them walk into an empty estate, dressed for a performance that never started. This whole mess started when I was 29. Back then, my life looked clean on paper. Steady job, decent savings, the kind of relationship people smiled at when they heard about it. I was the girl in the family who followed rules without making a big show of it. I didn't drink too much at parties. I never showed up late. I learned early that in our family, the quiet ones were expected to understand, and the loud ones were expected to shine. Lauren, my fiancé at the time, was my first real adult love. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have that performative charm some men wear like a tailored suit. What he had was presence. He listened with his whole face. When he laughed, it felt like the room warmed up. We'd been together 4 years by the time we got engaged, and I honestly believed we'd earned the right to feel safe. And then there was my sister, Stephanie. She was the favorite in our extended family in a way that didn't even try to hide itself. Our grandmother adored her like Stephanie could do no wrong. My aunt and uncle, her parents, paraded her achievements like trophies. "Finance," they'd say proudly, as if the word itself was proof of moral superiority. Expensive cars, big titles, that effortless way of making people lean in when she spoke. Stephanie didn't just take up space. She owned it. The week before my wedding, our whole family machine was running at full speed. The ceremony was planned for a Saturday in June. Venue booked. Invitations sent. Deposits paid. My parents had put money down on practically everything because they believed, like I did, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime moment worth protecting. Lauren and I stayed at my parents' house the night before because it was closer to the venue. I remember lying in that childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, hearing the faint clinks from downstairs where my mom was probably still organizing something. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't settle. I kept thinking about walking down the aisle, about the way my dad had looked at me at the engagement dinner, proud, emotional, trying not to show it. At around 6 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I padded down to the kitchen barefoot, the tile cold under my feet, the house still dim and quiet. I started the coffee maker, mostly for the comfort of doing something normal. That's when I saw Lauren's bag on the kitchen counter. Not unusual, except something was wrong, like the bag had been opened in a hurry. A small notebook had slipped out, fallen open on the floor. A journal. I shouldn't have touched it, I know that. But my name was right there, big enough to catch my eye like a hook. My hands moved before my brain could stop them. I picked it up, intending to close it and put it back. And then I read one line. Then two. Then I couldn't breathe properly anymore. Lauren had written that he'd been sleeping with Stephanie for 3 months. 3 months. While he kissed me goodnight, while my mother picked out table linens, while my father paid deposits, while I tried to choose vows that sounded like forever. Lauren wrote he couldn't go through with the wedding because he had real feelings for her. And then the sentence that turned my stomach into ice. Stephanie had been telling him I would never amount to much, and that he deserved a better life. I stood there in my parents' kitchen with my fiancé's secrets in my hands and the coffee dripping into the pot like it was mocking me for believing in anything. When I went upstairs and woke him, I didn't scream. My voice came out low and shaking. "Tell me this isn't true." Lauren started crying immediately, and that was the moment I knew. Because guilty tears don't argue, they confess. After Lauren admitted everything, the house didn't explode the way I'd always imagined betrayal would. It went quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until your own breathing sounds too loud. Lauren sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders curled inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. He kept saying my name over and over, like repetition might soften the damage. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he whispered. "She kept talking to me, listening. She understood me in ways I didn't even realize I needed." I remember staring at the wall behind him, at the faint shadow where a picture frame used to hang when I was a kid. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching this scene through glass. "How long?" I asked. 3 months. Each word landed heavy. 3 months of secrets layered over years of trust. He said Stephanie had pursued him first, that she told him I was holding him back, that I'd always be comfortable but never ambitious, that she painted herself as the woman who could open doors for him, elevate his life. I didn't interrupt. I didn't throw anything. I just listened and felt something inside me begin to shut down. Not dramatically, but deliberately. Within an hour, Lauren had packed his bag and left my parents' house. He didn't ask where he was going. He didn't ask if we could talk later. He just disappeared down the driveway while the sun climbed higher in the sky, lighting up a day that was supposed to be mine. Then came the phone calls. Canceling a wedding isn't a single conversation. It's 100 small funerals. Vendors first, venue second, then family, friends. The invitations people had already framed in their minds. My parents lost nearly $15,000 in deposits. They never once complained. My mother kept apologizing, like this was somehow her failure. My father went very still, the way he does when anger has nowhere productive to go. Stephanie denied everything at first. She sounded almost offended when I confronted her. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're imagining things." But when Lauren confirmed the affair, her story shifted seamlessly. "We fell in love," she said calmly. "It wasn't planned. These things just happen." Our grandmother sighed like she was tired of the drama. "Families survive worse than this," she said. "You should forgive her. Holding on to anger only hurts you." My aunt and uncle, Stephanie's parents, told me I was being dramatic. That love was complicated, that weddings could be postponed, but relationships shouldn't be punished. About half of our extended family quietly aligned with them. The rest didn't know what to do. Neutrality sounds mature until you realize it still leaves someone standing alone. My parents and my 2 younger sisters cut contact with Stephanie's side completely. Holidays became smaller, birthdays quieter, invitations stopped crossing certain lines. 6 months later, Stephanie and Lauren got married. They sent an announcement to the family. Not an invitation, an announcement. Our grandmother attended their wedding. My aunt posted photos everywhere, smiling faces, soft lighting, captions about new beginnings, and love winning in the end. I moved 2 hours away not long after that. Not to make a statement, just to breathe. I poured myself into work, starting a commercial landscaping business from the ground up. Long days, dirty hands, exhaustion that felt earned. It took 3 years to stabilize, but eventually I had 6 employees and steady contracts. I told myself I was over it, but some wounds don't throb. They harden, and when they do, they wait. I was 34 when I finally believed I was safe again. Not healed, safe. There's a difference. Healing feels like work. Safety feels like permission to breathe. That's when Julian entered my life. We met at an industry conference, 2 professionals killing time between panels, bonding over bad coffee and worse PowerPoint slides. He worked in property management, and I ran a commercial landscaping business. Our first real conversation wasn't about romance at all. It was about irrigation systems and how badly most developers underestimate long-term maintenance. That should have been my first clue. Our first date was at a small lakeside restaurant an hour from where we both lived. Nothing fancy. Wooden tables, water lapping gently against the dock. The kind of place where conversations stretch because no one is rushing you out. I told him about my past on our third date. Not the emotional version, the factual one. I didn't cry. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid out the timeline. My first engagement, my sister's betrayal, the family split. Julian listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't offer advice. He didn't tell me I needed closure or forgiveness. He just said, people who can do that usually don't start there. They've been practicing smaller betrayals for years. Then he asked me what kind of life I wanted now. That question mattered more than anything else. 2 years later, when he proposed, it wasn't flashy. No crowd, no cameras, just us, standing near that same lake after dinner. He gave me a ring he'd clearly thought about. Simple, elegant, nothing performative. I said yes without fear. We wanted something small. 40 people, close friends, immediate family, a garden ceremony, dinner, no spectacle. We found a venue about an hour away and put down a deposit. I felt in control, grounded. Then, 3 months before the wedding, my aunt and uncle reached out. Not directly, through my mother. They asked for a meeting, said it was important. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them at a coffee shop. They arrived armed. Spreadsheets, vendor quotes, printed bank statements. My uncle slid a folder across the table like he was making a business proposal. We want to pay for your wedding, he said. All of it. I laughed, actually laughed, because it sounded absurd. They said it was an apology, that they had failed as parents, that they understood now how much damage Stephanie had caused, that they wanted to do something meaningful. I told them Julian and I already had plans, that we didn't need help. My uncle flipped to a page showing nearly $40,000 set aside. My aunt started talking about upgrades, better venue, better food, better photographer. She mentioned a beautiful estate near my parents' house, owned by a friend, available at a discount. Something in her tone unsettled me. Too confident, too rehearsed. I told them I needed time. My mother didn't hesitate when I told her about the meeting. It's a trap, she said. Don't take $1 from them. My father agreed. Julian surprised me. He said carefully, it might be real, and if it is, turning it down might keep the wound open. We talked about it for 2 weeks. The money would change everything. Open bar, better food, fewer compromises. My parents were contributing $3,000. Julian's parents $5,000. This would elevate the entire experience. Eventually, we said yes. That's when my aunt took over. She called twice a week, she booked vendors, she hired a planner, she always asked our opinion, and never pushed when we said no. The guest list grew. 40 became 80. As long as I'm paying, she said lightly, we might as well invite more family. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself people could change. 2 weeks before the wedding, at 11 at night, my phone rang. It was Donna, and her voice was shaking. I overheard something, she said, and you need to know. When the recording played, and I heard my aunt planning my humiliation like a production schedule, that was the moment I realized. This wasn't reconciliation. It was control. And it was about to happen on my wedding day, unless I stopped it. I listened to the recording 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because my mind kept trying to soften it, reframe it, pretend there was some misunderstanding buried between the words. There wasn't. My aunt's voice was calm, organized, proud. She talked about timing, about impact, about how emotional pressure would do the work for us. She talked about me like I was a variable to be managed. When the audio ended, the room felt smaller. I realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing, and when I finally exhaled, my hands were shaking so badly I had to set my phone down on the table. Julian was sitting across from me, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He didn't speak right away. That scared me more than anger would have. Finally, he said, they don't see you as a person. They see you as a solution. That sentence hit harder than anything on the recording. I drove to his apartment that night because I didn't trust myself to be alone. The city lights blurred as I drove, my thoughts looping between the past and the present, between the girl who woke up at 6 a.m. and found her world destroyed in a journal, and the woman who was about to walk into another ambush if she stayed quiet. When I played the audio for him again, he didn't interrupt. He didn't pace. He just listened, jaw tight, one hand clenched around the arm of the chair. When it finished, he looked up at me. We're not doing this, he said. Not angrily, decisively. For a moment, guilt surged up, sharp and automatic. They're paying for the wedding. They've already booked everything. People will talk. That old conditioning flared. Don't make a scene. Don't be difficult. Don't embarrass the family. Then another thought followed, quieter but stronger. They already planned to embarrass me. Julian asked me what I wanted to do, not what would be easiest, not what would look best. I told him the truth. I want to get married, I said. Just not like this. Not with them turning it into a spectacle. That's when he told me something I didn't know. His brother Mark, an event planner, had felt uneasy from the start. He'd offered to help with our wedding for free, and my aunt had shut him down immediately. Mark had told Julian privately that people who insist on controlling every detail usually aren't doing it out of generosity. Julian called Mark right then. It was almost 1 a.m. Mark didn't sound surprised. "I've kept an eye on a few backup options," he said, "just in case." My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with relief. The original restaurant where Julian and I had our first date, the lakeside one, might be available. Mark said he could confirm in the morning. The wedding was on Saturday. This was Monday night. Everything moved fast after that. Julian called his brothers. I called my parents. My mother didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "What do you need from me?" My father asked one question. "Do you want to still get married?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Then we'll make it happen." We decided not to confront my aunt. Not yet. We didn't owe her explanations. We didn't owe her another chance to manipulate the narrative. Instead, we quietly rerouted everything. Mark secured the restaurant. Julian's brothers coordinated logistics. We sent messages to the people we actually wanted there, close friends, immediate family, explaining that the location had changed due to unexpected issues. We cut the guest list down to 50. I didn't sleep much that week. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. I kept expecting my aunt to call and demand answers, to sense something slipping out of her control. On Wednesday, my mother called her. She said we were having second thoughts about such a large wedding, nothing more. My aunt begged. She said everything was paid for, that it would be humiliating to cancel. I almost laughed. By Friday night, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing myself for impact. Saturday morning, I stood in front of the mirror and put on my dress. Not the one my aunt had chosen. The one I had chosen. And as I looked at my reflection, I realized something quietly powerful. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to see what my family would do to me. I was deciding what I would allow. Saturday arrived with a kind of eerie calm, the kind that feels borrowed, like the air is holding its breath. Julian and I didn't tell my aunt we knew about her plan. We didn't cancel anything outright. We simply didn't show up. While I was standing by the lake, smoothing the front of my dress, as sunlight flickered across the water, my aunt was at an estate 30 minutes away, convinced she was about to stage the redemption arc of her dreams. I found out later what happened there. My aunt had told everyone the ceremony would start at 4. She hadn't notified anyone of a cancellation because in her mind there wasn't one. About 70 people arrived, extended family, her friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. They stood around the manicured lawn, murmuring, checking their watches, wondering why the bride was late. At 3:30, Stephanie arrived, with Lauren, and their 2 children, right on schedule. My aunt greeted them loudly, hugging them like honored guests, guiding them toward the ceremony area as if this was always the plan. Several people noticed immediately. The tension shifted. Whispers rippled through the crowd. My uncle's brother, who had stayed mostly neutral over the years, watched it all with growing disbelief. Then one of my college friends stepped forward and asked the question everyone was thinking. "Did you get an invitation?" Stephanie froze. She looked at my aunt. My aunt smiled and said, "Oh, they were just running late." That's when Julian's brother Anthony stepped in. He hadn't been invited. He was there for one reason only. He raised his voice, not shouting, just loud enough to cut through the confusion. "The wedding has been moved to a different location," he said. "Only invited guests were notified." People stared at him, then at my aunt. Anthony continued, calm and clear. "The couple discovered that their financial contribution was being used to control the guest list and force a situation against their wishes." Silence, then noise. Questions, gasps, phones coming out. My aunt tried to speak, something about second chances, about healing, but her words landed flat. My grandmother, who had been invited without our knowledge, walked up to Stephanie and Lauren and surprised everyone. "You should leave," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, it was tired. She said showing up uninvited was worse than what Stephanie had done 5 years ago, because it proved she still didn't understand boundaries or respect. Lauren argued back. She said her parents had paid for everything, that they had a right to be there. And in that moment, the truth cracked wide open. People started leaving. Others stayed just to watch. My aunt broke down. She talked about the 18 months she'd spent planning this reconciliation, about the videographer she'd hired, about coordinating with Lauren to make the apology feel real. She said she'd done all of it for the family. Someone recorded it. Several people posted about it before my aunt could control the story. Meanwhile, my wedding was happening. Not perfectly, but honestly, 45 people showed up. Julian's brothers had arranged simple decorations. The restaurant handled the food. No grand speeches, no spectacle. Just us. We got married by the same lake where we'd had our first date. My parents were there, my sisters were there, Julian's family was there. Our friends, people who knew the truth, were there. When Julian took my hands, I felt grounded, present, not braced for humiliation or emotional pressure, just chosen. The dinner ended around 9. There were toasts, laughter, cake. No apologies, no forced forgiveness. The fallout came fast. Within days, extended family members who had stayed neutral started reaching out. Apologies poured in, some sincere, some awkward, some clearly motivated by fear of being on the wrong side of the story. Details surfaced. The wedding planner came forward with messages showing my aunt had instructed her to seat Stephanie and Lauren front and center. The florist admitted my aunt had asked to include Lauren's favorite flowers in my bouquet, without telling me. The photographer had been briefed to focus heavily on capturing Stephanie's apology and the family's reaction. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. It was a long-term strategy. And once people saw it clearly, the damage to my aunt and uncle's reputation spread far beyond the family. Their friends distanced themselves. My uncle lost clients. My grandmother called me 2 days after the wedding and apologized, fully, without excuses. She said watching the manipulation made her realize how long she'd enabled Stephanie. She said she was changing her will. That triggered another explosion. My aunt accused my mother of poisoning her. My mother recorded the call. In it, my aunt admitted she knew I would never agree voluntarily, which is why she had to force the situation. That recording spread too. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was steady. For the first time since I was 29, the truth didn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belonged to the people willing to see it. And I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The adrenaline carried me through the wedding day. It carried me through the hugs, the congratulations, the careful smiles from relatives who didn't quite know what to say yet. And then it left. The crash didn't come loudly. It came late at night, after Julian fell asleep beside me in the hotel room, his breathing slow and even, like his body finally trusted the world again. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My dress was folded neatly on the chair across from the bed. The room smelled faintly of lake water and cake frosting. Everything should have felt complete. Instead, my chest felt hollow. Because even though we'd won, if you could call it that, I had finally accepted something I'd been avoiding for years. There was no version of my family where this ended cleanly. No moment where everyone sat down, understood each other, and moved forward together. What I'd done, what Julian and I had done, had drawn a permanent line. And I was the one who'd drawn it. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming. Some were supportive, others were careful, coded, heavy with implication. You didn't have to humiliate them like that. They meant well, even if they went about it the wrong way. Families need forgiveness to survive. Each one landed like a small weight on my ribs. I started waking up with a tight jaw, my teeth sore from clenching in my sleep. My appetite disappeared. I found myself rereading the same email 3 or 4 times at work, unable to focus. At night, memories crept in uninvited. Stephanie laughing at family dinners. My grandmother brushing off concerns with a hand wave. Lauren standing in my parents' bedroom, crying, not because he'd hurt me, but because he'd been caught. I wondered, quietly, dangerously, if I'd become the problem. If maybe I was the common denominator in all this conflict. Julian noticed before I said anything. One evening, a week after the wedding, he sat down next to me on the couch and took my hands. "You're not okay," he said gently. I wanted to argue, to deflect, to say I was just tired. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "What if I destroyed any chance of this family ever being whole again?" He didn't answer right away. He thought about it. Then he said something that shifted the ground under my feet. "What if it was never whole to begin with, and you were just the one expected to absorb the damage?" That night, I cried harder than I had since the morning I found that journal. Not dramatic sobs. Quiet, shaking tears. The kind that come when you finally stop holding yourself together for everyone else. I mourned the version of my family I'd spent years hoping for, the imaginary future holidays, the fantasy where accountability magically appeared without conflict. Letting go of that hope hurt more than losing any single person. At my lowest moment, I opened my phone and stared at my aunt's voicemails. 6 of them. Her voice cracked with fury and self-pity. She accused me of humiliating her, of destroying her standing in the family. She said all she wanted was unity, and I was too selfish to see it. For a split second, I almost called her back. Almost tried to explain myself one last time. Instead, I deleted them, one by one. And in that silence, something inside me broke and rebuilt itself differently. I realized that protecting my peace didn't make me cruel. It made me honest. The darkest part wasn't what I'd lost. It was finally understanding how much I'd been asked to give up to keep everyone else comfortable, and knowing, deep down, that I couldn't go back. Not this time. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces, quiet, undeniable moments that rearranged how I saw everything I'd survived. The first came 2 days after I deleted my aunt's voicemails. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw my grandmother's name. For years, she had been the soft place my sister landed, the excuse maker, the one who smoothed things over and told me not to take it so personally. I braced myself, but when I picked up, her voice sounded different, smaller, older. "I owe you an apology," she said. No preamble, no conditions. She told me that watching my aunt unravel at the estate had done something to her, that seeing manipulation laid bare, so public, so undeniable, had forced her to confront how long she'd been enabling it, how often she'd chosen charm over character. "I kept telling myself she'd grow out of it," she said quietly, and then one day, I realized she never had to. She told me she was changing her will. My sister and her family were being removed as beneficiaries. The money would be placed in a trust for the rest of the grandchildren and their future children, protected, untouchable. I sat very still as she spoke. I didn't feel victorious. I felt validated, not because punishment was happening, but because reality was finally being acknowledged by someone who mattered. 2 days later, another truth surfaced. The wedding planner my aunt had hired reached out to Julian's brother Mark. She provided messages, screenshots showing explicit instructions about seating arrangements, camera angles, and timing for the apology moment. Then the florist came forward. My aunt had requested Lauren's favorite flowers be added to my bouquet, without my knowledge. The photographer confirmed he'd been told to focus on my sister's emotional arc, not the ceremony. This wasn't emotional chaos. It was choreography. The turning point hit me hardest late one evening, when Julian and I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by printed pages, texts, timelines, notes Mark had organized meticulously. Julian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't imagine any of it," he said, and something loosened in my chest. For years, I'd questioned my instincts, second-guessed my boundaries, wondered if I was too sensitive, too rigid, too unwilling to move on. Seeing it all laid out, clear, documented, undeniable, freed me from that doubt. The final piece came unexpectedly. My sister reached out, not directly to Julian. She sent a message asking if we could clear the air. I read it once, then again. There was no accountability in it, no recognition of harm, just discomfort at consequences. I realized then that forgiveness, real forgiveness, requires truth. And truth requires responsibility. I told Julian to ignore it. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies that came too late. Not for change that required public pressure. Not for a version of family that only existed if I kept shrinking myself. The power shift wasn't loud. It was internal. I stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped rehearsing arguments in my head. I chose peace, not as avoidance, but as direction. And for the first time since I was 29, I wasn't defined by what had been taken from me. I was defined by what I refused to give up again. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They rolled in slowly, like a tide that didn't care who was ready for it. Within a week of the wedding, the story had spread far beyond what my aunt could control. Not because Julian or I talked, but because too many people had witnessed too much. The estate confrontation had been recorded from 3 different angles, screenshots circulated, people compared notes. Truth doesn't need help when enough people see the same thing. Extended family members who'd stayed neutral for years started calling me. Some apologized awkwardly, circling the point before landing it. Others were blunt. "I should have believed you 5 years ago." My aunt tried to rally support, but the tone had shifted. Where she expected sympathy, she got silence. Where she tried to explain, people asked uncomfortable questions. Why was a videographer hired specifically for a reconciliation? Why was my sister involved in planning my wedding? Why was money used to override boundaries? There were no good answers. My uncle's business reputation took the hardest hit. He owned a regional insurance agency, and several of his longtime clients had been at the estate or heard about it directly from people they trusted. Within 2 weeks, 3 clients left. Quietly. No drama. Just gone. Word spreads fast when trust cracks. My aunt called my mother in a rage, accusing her of poisoning my grandmother against my sister. My mother recorded the call. In it, my aunt admitted she'd known I would never agree voluntarily, which was why she needed to force the reconciliation. When that recording made the rounds, the narrative collapsed completely. My grandmother followed through on the will change. When my aunt found out, she showed up at her house screaming. The police were called. A restraining order was filed. Watching that from a distance was surreal. This was the woman who once lectured me about keeping family matters private. Now she was being escorted off her own mother's property. My sister's life unraveled more quietly, but just as thoroughly. Her marriage, already strained, began to crack under pressure. She'd expected that once the reconciliation happened, she'd be welcomed back into family gatherings, that her children would be embraced, that the slate would be wiped clean. Instead, doors closed. Relatives stopped inviting her. Old friends distanced themselves. Online comments corrected the version of events she tried to present. She blamed everyone but herself. And when she blamed my aunt for the plan failing, my aunt blamed her right back. Meanwhile, my wedding, the real one, kept echoing in small, unexpected ways. The restaurant owner sent us a handwritten note thanking us for trusting them with our day. He included a gift certificate for our anniversary and wrote that he admired how we handled a difficult situation with grace. Grace. I hadn't felt graceful, but I accepted the word anyway. The hardest moment came when my sister finally reached out directly, through a private message. She asked if we could meet, just us, no parents. I showed it to Julian. He didn't tell me what to do. He just asked how I felt, and I knew the answer immediately. Tired, I told her no. Not with anger, not with insults. Just no, because reconciliation offered only after consequences isn't reconciliation. It's regret. I didn't celebrate her losses. I didn't take satisfaction in my aunt's humiliation. What I felt was distance. Clean, necessary distance. For the first time, the damage wasn't being absorbed by me. It was landing where it belonged. And that changed everything. 2 weeks after the wedding, Julian and I left town. No announcements, no dramatic exits. We drove west into Colorado, where the air thins, and the noise inside your head finally has room to quiet down. We hiked during the day, our muscles sore in a good way, our phones forgotten in the car. At night, we sat on a small cabin porch wrapped in blankets, watching the sky darken without needing to fill the silence. That's where it finally settled. Not the anger. Not the grief. The clarity. I realized I hadn't ruined my family. I'd stopped lying to myself about what it was. Families don't break because one person sets boundaries. They break when those boundaries expose years of manipulation that were only holding together because someone stayed silent. When we came home, life didn't magically become simple, but it became honest. I blocked my aunt's number. Julian blocked her too. We didn't announce it. We didn't explain it. We just closed the door. A few weeks later, we found out I was pregnant. 6 months along now. When I told my parents, my mother cried the way she did when I was born. Soft, overwhelmed, grateful. Julian's parents immediately started talking about converting their guest room into a nursery. My sisters sent tiny socks in the mail with handwritten notes. We didn't make a public announcement, not because we were afraid. Because peace doesn't need an audience. My grandmother asked, carefully, if she could be involved. I said yes, not because of obligation, but because she'd taken responsibility for her part and respected our boundaries since. That difference matters. I still think about my first wedding sometimes. About the girl I was at 29, standing in her parents' kitchen with a journal in her hands and her future collapsing around her. I wish I could tell her this. You don't owe forgiveness to people who refuse accountability. You don't owe access to people who confuse control with love. And you don't owe silence to keep a family comfortable at your expense. The wedding that mattered wasn't the one with the better venue or the bigger budget. It was the one where I chose myself. Now I'm building a family that understands something my old one never did. Love isn't proven by how much you endure. It's proven by how well you're protected. And that lesson is something I'll carry forward. Not with bitterness, but with intention.